So in this video, I'm going to talk about the signs of each trig function in the different quadrants of the unit circle. So I would recommend you watch my previous video on the unit circle and how the trig functions are related to the ordered pairs on the unit circle. If you already know what I'm talking about, then great. If not, I would watch the previous video, which will be in the description of this one. So in your unit circle, we have a radius of 1, which means if the center is at 0, 0, this point right here must be 1, 0. This point up here is 0, 1. This point over here is -1, 0, and down here I have 0, -1. In the previous video, I talked about how your cosine values are actually just the x value of your ordered pair, and your sine values are just the y value of your ordered pair. I also talked about how this part of the unit circle is your starting point. And if you're ever going to draw an angle, you start from this point and then you either go counterclockwise to form a positive angle or clockwise to form a negative angle. Now, if cosine is the x value of your ordered pair and sine is the y value of your ordered pair, I'm going to talk about my starting point really quick. If this is my starting point and I don't go anywhere, that must be a 0-degree angle, so I haven't gone anywhere. So that means the cosine of 0 degrees is equal to 1. The way that you read this is just, what is the x value at 0 degrees? That's how you can think of cosine. Similar with the sine, if you want to know the sine of 0 degrees, it's just the y value at 0 degrees. So the sine of 0 degrees would equal 0. So sine at our starting point is 0. Cosine at our starting point is 1. So that's a little introduction to cosine and sine being x and y. Same applies for these other 3 points here. If I start at my starting point and I rotate up here to 0, 1, that would be a 90-degree angle, right? This is a 90-degree angle here. So that means the cosine of 90 degrees is just the x value at 90 degrees, which is 0. That means the sine of 90 degrees would be 1. So you can probably figure out the sine and cosine of our other two quadrants. Or sorry, not quadrants, the other 2 points that I have on there. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the quadrants. So this is something that could be helpful later on if you know what the sine, not S-I-N-E, S-I-G-N, the sine of cosine, sine, and tangent are on your unit circle. Now, I already said that cosine is x, so I'll write this over here. Cosine is x, sine is y, and I went over this in the last video. Tangent is y divided by x. So we're going to talk about whether cosine, sine, and tangent are going to be positive or negative in each quadrant. Because if you know that from memory, it'll be very helpful down the road. So remember, this is quadrant 1 up here. That's where I'm going to start. Sine is my y value. Cosine is my x value. So think about if you have a point somewhere here in quadrant 1, I went to the right and I also went up. So going to the right would be a positive x value, going up would be a positive x value. If sine is y and cosine is x, sine and cosine are both going to be positive for an angle in here between 0 and 90. So if I ask for the sine of 40 degrees, that's between 0 and 90, so it must have a positive sine value. Now remember, tangent is y divided by x. So you would have a positive number divided by another positive number, which is still positive. So your three trig functions are positive in the first quadrant. If you move over to the second quadrant, remember this up here was 90 degrees. If we rotate again to this point, this must be 180 degrees. Remember, a straight line is 180. So if you go from our starting point to 180, it's a flat line. So in quadrant 2, we would have had to move to the left and then up to get to quadrant 2. That means sine is positive since that's our y values, but this time cosine is negative since we moved to the left. And tangent, remember, is y divided by x, or sine divided by cosine. So if you're asked for the tangent of an angle in this quadrant, it would equal a negative number. So if I asked you for the cosine of 120 degrees, that falls in quadrant 2, so cosine would be negative. Moving on to the third quadrant, if I rotate another 90 degrees, I'm now at 270. So any angle between 180 and 270 is going to have these signs for the trig functions. To get to quadrant 3, you would have moved left and down. So x and y are, oops, that's not a plus sign. X and y are both negative numbers. So if I moved left, cosine is negative. If I moved down, sine is negative. And tangent, remember, is sine divided by cosine, or y divided by x. So that actually equals a positive number. Moving on to the fourth quadrant. If I go another 90 degrees, I said earlier that this is 0 degrees, but if you make a full rotation, it's also 360 degrees. Now in this quadrant, I move to the right, so my x value is positive, but I move down, so my y value is negative. Sine is my y value, which is negative. Cosine is my x value, which is positive. Y over x, which is sine over cosine, would be negative divided by positive, meaning tangent would have a negative value in the fourth quadrant.